I've waited a long time to make this video, mainly because I have no idea how people are going to react to it. As you know, I cover a lot of dark and tough subjects on this channel. The fall of the Western world and the fate of humanity type stuff. And through it all, simply calling out how bad things are or how crazy they've become can get repetitive unless a solution can be offered, unless there's a pathway to suggest to people we all need hope and to believe in a better world. And I hope this video explains not only my own journey towards an emerging spirituality, as well as some reason for optimism, but also offers a clear explanation of how we can overcome the existential threats facing our nations. It seems now that a pattern is beginning to emerge among many of us who operate in this genre of red pill philosophy. When you take the metaphorical red pill, it's just the first epiphany, the first layer. You realize how much you've been lied to all your life. You discover that you've been fed an ideology perpetuated through biased narratives and spin. You begin to discern truth from illusion and reject the programming that they attempted to indoctrinate you with. Now, if the red pill is the means by which you discover that you've been lied to, the black pill is how you learn just how dangerous those lies truly were. The black pill is where you descend down the rabbit hole further and learn just how bad things have become. It's where the consequences of evil become truly apparent. It's also the point where you begin to experience a degree of hopelessness and despondence. This is the point of rock bottom. But luckily from there, the only way is up. Things can seem bleak, but it's virtually impossible to stay black-pilled for long. It's simply too difficult to entertain nihilism or despair for extended periods of time. Eventually, an appetite for hope, optimism, and meaning begins to develop. The soul requires nourishment. Enter the white pill, also known as the God pill. You begin to desire action, order, purpose, and a semblance of values in your life. The world may be going crazy, but you're not going to. The very values that have been stripped from Western nations by the left for the last 50 years gradually begin to make sense. I guess I considered myself an atheist since I was about 13. I rejected the religious teachings of my parents, who were both devout Catholics and quite conservative. And as I entered my teenage years, I began to become more liberal, and I believed that I could have all the answers, that science and secularism were adequate substitutes for religion and faith. But as I grew older, I also became more conservative, and I began to realize that the wisdom of my parents was based on something timeless, universal, and tried and tested for thousands of years, that the teachings of Christ were a set of rules and instructions that not only made intuitive sense when carefully studied, but actually had been essential in building and maintaining our Western civilization. While a decade ago I had buried myself in the Horsemen, in my mid to late 20s watching Hitch, Harris, Dawkins and Dennett own religious apologists in debates time and time again, I had, however, dismissed all too quickly that the Horsemen were simply unable to adequately refute the claim that you cannot get an ought from an is. Science is the means by which we understand the physical world around us. It is not the means by which we derive our morality. For that, we need philosophy, metaphysics, religion. Human beings need relatable stories, instructions, parables, in order to develop a moral and ethical framework in which to live. Science and religion are actually not in conflict, as some atheists believe. They're not actually in competition. One is the means by which we understand the physical world around us. The other is the means by which we derive meaning and moral instruction. This system may even form the basis of a legal system or constitution for a nation-state to live by, but the core philosophy must be based upon something that cannot be altered or replaced by man-made ideals. It's the idea that there is a higher power that man is answerable to, that governments and politicians cannot challenge, that the state is beholden to the values and morals that the populace subscribe to. This is one of the primary utilities of religion in our society.
The Irish Constitution, the preamble begins, "In the name of the most holy Trinity, in whom is all authority, and to whom, as our final end, all matters of men and of states must be referred." A very beautiful sentence. Now, Dave, you see, you can treat that as a kind of prayer, an invocation, if you want. And it has that appearance and feel. And I understand how non-religious people might kind of balk at that. And I always say this, when I was talking about it, I always say, look, I understand. I understand. But it's also something else. Apart from it, you can just back away from that fear you have, which is a natural kind of maybe a resentment or a sense of, And I said, it's something else. It's a mechanism to do something. And what is it? It's a mechanism to take the most fundamental rights of human beings and place them out of the reach of human beings, so they can't be interfered with. And that's how you protect human beings from tyranny.
Nations and even empires that lose religion tend to collapse within a couple of generations. This is the pattern that John Glubb observed time and time again when he catalogued the rise and fall of great powers throughout history. When an age of decadence is reached in a society, an age of liberalism follows. When you take God out of the equation, man tries to become God. Communism, which is once again trying to infiltrate every facet of our culture and compromise our institutions in the form of globalism, believes that the state is God, that it can be mother and father to an infantilized, powerless, and impoverished proletariat. It doesn't even matter if you believe in an afterlife or an interventionist God at all, or how the universe got started. These discussions are great fodder for theoretical debates, but they won't build or maintain a society. They won't protect against communism or indeed another outside religion that seeks to dominate the West. Everything the left has done has been a gradual attempt to take people away from who and what they are and where they came from. Christianity celebrates the vital importance of the family unit, the most powerful defense against an authoritarian state. In Christianity, the roles of men and women are clearly defined, with great respect given to the unique roles of the mother and the father, and the importance of raising children in a set of values shared by other members of our community and tribe. The community-building aspect of the religious service, the Mass, and the profession of faith ensure that everyone knows they are part of something bigger than themselves, that there's an authority beyond a democratically elected politician in office. This is how a nation-state is maintained, by recognizing the value of the family. As you can see, it's not hard to understand why the leftist cultural Marxists have attacked religion and the family at every turn. This is what Yuri Bezmenov covered extensively in his lectures. The subversion of America, like many Western nations, has taken place by promoting hedonism, sexuality, drugs, and the obsession with materialism, individual rights, and individualism. Anything that gets people away from Christianity, settling down, starting a family, and raising their children in the value system of their ancestors. In Christian nations, the origin story of our culture is the birth of Christ. Now, even if you're not religious, even if you don't take the stories of Jesus literally, you can probably acknowledge that an origin story about the birth of a child and a savior born to bring peace to the world is a powerful message and a symbol of hope for future generations. But if people are encouraged to move away from Christianity, then they lose attachment to this story, and the origin story of who and what they are becomes rewritten. It's replaced with a focus on the worst moments in our history. This is why, in many modern liberalized Western nations nowadays, the native people are being encouraged to be ashamed of their past. In social justice-infested college courses in America, young Americans are brainwashed into self-loathing. They're encouraged to feel guilty for atrocities committed by their ancestors from hundreds of years ago. The same is true of many European nations. Their people are being encouraged to feel an intense sense of guilt and self-hatred for their colonial past, for example. So once the story we told ourselves about where we came from spiritually was based on the hope of a young child being born who could usher in a new age of peace for all humanity, now it's about negativity, despair, and hopelessness. You cannot build anything stable or successful on such foundations. On the theme of the birth of a child, third-wave feminism has promoted and attempted to normalize abortion, so the left has literally become like a death cult. You see, although the promotion of left-wing ideology is ultimately about power, it's also not quite as simple as a straightforward attack on conservatism. It's an attack on Christianity that goes back as far as the crucifixion of Christ, getting people away from their Christian heritage and values, disconnecting people from God, and making them docile and compliant by promoting distractions that placate the masses: consumerism, pornography, sex, instant gratification, drugs, and materialism. Now, my mother, who was devoutly Christian, died 22 months ago from today. Since her passing, it's as though something has resonated within me that hadn't before. As though when she left, the doorway to some other place was left just slightly ajar, wide enough for some kind of light to come through. I knelt down one night, and for the first time in many years, prayed the Lord's Prayer. I'd said the Our Father many times as a child. I repeated it like a mantra, words that never truly meant anything to me. But this time, suddenly something changed when I reached the line, "Lead us not into temptation." Now, you can look at those words and not fully interpret their reason for being. Lead us not into temptation. What's so objectively bad about temptation? Well, it's the next line that suddenly struck a chord with me because it justifies that previous line. But deliver us from evil. So, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Now, all of a sudden, for the first time, given everything I was witnessing in the world, I could understand the context of why this prayer had been written this particular way. What has the left been promoting for the past number of decades? Temptation, sin, greed, materialism, deviation from the path, a denial of nature. If you corrupt the people, promote vice and their baser animal instincts, you bring about the destruction of the nation state. Promiscuity rather than monogamy results in unplanned pregnancy, broken homes, low parental investment. Marriage is destroyed by feminism. Alternative lifestyles are promoted. The act of sexual union between two people is no longer respected. Pregnancy and the creation of new life becomes a nuisance. By no longer believing in a power beyond man, the state becomes the thing that everyone relies on, from welfare to their rights. It becomes extremely powerful and soon after, authoritarian. Suddenly, in those few words of the Our Father, I had gained an insight and a truth that had been hiding in plain sight my whole life. As E. Michael Jones would call it, logos. St. Augustine said that a man has as many masters as he has vices. And as E. Michael Jones has talked about, the left has sold vice as a form of liberation. In truth, we become enslaved to our base, greedy and primitive natures, and thus much easier for governments to control. The people become docile and malleable and atomized, especially since identity politics is promoted to further divide and conquer people. Our nations are also becoming increasingly less safe under leftist control and further destabilized and therefore more heavily policed. The power of the state is increasing as people surrender their freedom for more so-called security. Now these words of this prayer began to make sense. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. If an organ in the body or a cell is damaged, if part of us is dying, the rest of the body suffers. If a large portion of individuals in our society are succumbing to a self-destructive path, the society suffers as a whole. Ironically, people are being sold enslavement as freedom. The left hates Christianity more than anything, because it can't control people who believe in something bigger than the state. It's now my belief that the greatest act of defiance we can make against globalism is to spread the teachings of Jesus Christ. On the Sermon of the Mount, Christ says, "Resist not evil." Now I thought I understood this message, that this commandment made no sense. Of course we have to resist evil, otherwise it'll win. Now, recently I heard a pretty interesting interpretation of this commandment by John Butler, which was something to the effect of, don't justify evil by giving it your attention. Don't come into conflict with it, because to do so is to give it power. There is only one power in the universe, one force, not two forces. Evil is only maintained so long as people stray from the path. You empower it by giving it your attention. Think of it another way. If you're driving to a destination and you have two possible roads before you, once you know that you're on the correct road, you don't need to give any attention to the wrong road anymore. You don't need to focus on the darkness when you're looking towards the light. As Bezmenov explained, the antidote to Marxist subversion is to ignore its tactics and focus on religion instead.
The most difficult and at the same time the simplest answer to the subversion is to start it here and even before, by bringing back the society to religion, something that you cannot touch and eat and put on yourself, but something that rules society and makes it move and preserve it. A Soviet scientist, Shafarevich, who has nothing to do with religion, did a very intensive research on the history of socialist countries, and he discovered, actually he didn't discover it, he just brought to attention of his readers, that civilizations like Mohenjo-Daro, like Egypt, like Maya, Incas, like Babylonian culture, collapsed and disappeared from the surface of Earth. The moment they lost religion, as simple as that, they disintegrated. All the sophisticated technology and computers will not prevent society from disintegrating and eventually dying out. Have you ever met a person who would sacrifice his life, freedom, for the truth like that? This is truth. I never met a person who said, this is truth and I'm ready to shoot me. To defend the truth. Right? But millions sacrifice their life, freedom, comfort, everything for things like God, like Jesus Christ. It's an honor.
In Ireland, many people conflate the corrupted institution of the Catholic Church with Christianity. And because people have rejected their spiritual tradition, what has happened in Ireland? Well, it's becoming less Irish by the day. Try to think of a Western nation that's succumbed to leftism that's also got strong borders. When Ireland began to lose its faith, which is to say the pillar it was built on, unsurprisingly, it began to slowly unravel. Now marriage has been redefined, and people have been so brainwashed that they've literally voted to take away the rights from a portion of their own society, the unborn, and they celebrated this with tears of joy in the streets when they did so. They've given up on their future because the most vulnerable and precious in our society, our children, are no longer protected, and their right to life has been superseded by a woman's right to treat that life as if it was nothing more than a piercing or a tattoo on her body. If you change the values of a nation's people, you change the nation. If you distract the people with concerns about rights this and rights that, hedonism, sexuality, etc., they will become focused on selfish navel-gazing and concerns that don't matter. Contrast liberal Ireland to conservative Poland. In Poland, they have Christian values and a strong sense of their identity and a desire to maintain strong borders. Poland will therefore survive. I look at the vandalization of our Christian heritage and celebrations. St. Patrick's Day is reduced to a glorified excuse for massive alcohol consumption. Easter doesn't appear to be about the death of Christ for most people anymore. It's become about chocolate eggs and the Easter bunny. Likewise, Christmas is completely divorced from the birth of Christ, and it's now become a tacky commercial holiday that begins in late September and promotes hyper-consumerism and materialism. People now engage in alternative quasi-spiritual practices, trying to replace real spirituality with yoga and meditation. Now, meditation can be very useful for breathing control and quelling anxiety, and that's fine. I'm not knocking it, but it contains no content, so therefore it cannot be used as a substitution for a moral framework and a value system. Something more is needed. With the loss of religion, we've also jettisoned notions of sacrifice, personal accountability, restraint, honor, and duty. These were considered virtues once. Now there's another important component of this, the recognition that we are corruptible and imperfect, that we will try and often fail to be good. This is why no matter how much we mess up, no matter what we've said or done or not done, the challenge of redemption is always possible. The gift of forgiveness is always offered by God. Now, I'm not going to pontificate to you or sell you some notion of an anthropomorphic, all-powerful being in the sky. I have no idea what that force resembles. I'm also not going to tell you that the purpose of doing good is a reward in heaven. I'm not even fully sold on the idea of an afterlife. Maybe there is something, I don't know, but that's not why I changed. To do good knowing there's no reward is to be truly noble. When I prayed to God, I said, I will change even if I get no answer, because the word of Jesus makes more sense to me now given the state of our world. So at some point, I stopped believing in nothing, because there is simply too much order in the universe, too many telltale signs of purpose and intent in reality for me to ignore the possibility that some guiding hand was behind all of this. The universe began with the first subatomic particles, and then eventually the formation of atoms, then light elements. Before too long, dense concentrations of gases and molecular clouds formed the first stars. Planets formed millions of years later. Some of those planets have atmospheres. Some of them fall into a kind of Goldilocks zone that can support life. From the beginning, the universe is just busy doing stuff, making stuff, and creating ever-increasing complexity. Simple life begins to form and begins to reproduce itself. Some of that life evolves to such a complex degree that suddenly birds are flying around making nests, beavers are constructing dams, and human beings are writing books, building civilizations and empires, and making movies and smartphones. If there's a single instruction that the divine software architect programmed into the universe from the beginning, it's creation. Destruction is part of the cycle of creation and the unending move towards more complexity. Animals and humans die and their bodies will decay into the earth, but other life will feed on those remains. Planets will die, solar systems will be destroyed by exploding stars, but new material will continuously be created in stellar nurseries and recycled by the cosmos. We are the universe made flesh, made aware of itself, and what we believe and how we choose to live matters. Nations will fall, but powerful ideas will remain timeless and powerful forever. The answer is not only about rejecting destructive ideology. It's about embracing the philosophy of creation. It's about choosing life and not death, hope and not despair. Now, I know a lot of you have your fears for the world. You watch political content because you care. You care about the future and where we're headed. I also know that though we can all agree on a great many things together, there's a good chance I won't be able to convince many of you of what I've been saying in this video. So I can only conclude by saying that I believe that the wisdom and lessons of our past will show us how to chart a course to a better future. That it is our duty to help those less fortunate, lest we forget the lesson, there but for the grace of God go I. I believe that we must also pray for our enemies, as they simply know not what they do, and we will all ultimately answer to the same authority in the end. Our enemies may hope for our destruction, but we do not pray for theirs. To do so would make us no different to them. So we pray that they can be saved from the evil they have succumbed to. I believe that those we've lost have never truly left us, that they have become part of something greater and more powerful than any man-made evil in our world. I believe this power is a benevolent and uniting force that governs all things in our universe and seeks to provide us with the means to save ourselves from human frailty and damnation. I believe that within this force we will find our salvation and peace, and that if we place our faith in that power, it will lead us not into temptation, but it will deliver us from evil forever. Amen.